The tunnels of Carthon mines stretched for miles under the red mountains, glowing with strange blue light from the ore veins. The air was heavy with dust and fear. Chains rattled in the dark as alien girls swung their pickaxes again and again, too weak to stand straight. Their silver skin shimmered faintly under the glow, their eyes dull from endless work. None dared to speak because the guards listened, and the guards had whips that burned like fire. Then one day the sound of metal doors slammed open. Everyone froze. The guards were dragging someone new down the main shaft. The slaves turned their heads expecting another girl, but what stepped out of the shadows made them gasp. It was a human. He was tall, wearing torn, dust-covered clothes. His hands were bound, his face bruised, but his eyes, they were calm, cold and calm, like someone who had already faced worse things than death. The alien overseer, a tall creature with bone plates across his face, laughed when he saw him. "So, a human dares to step into my mine," the overseer sneered. "They said you were strong. Let's see how long that strength lasts." The human said nothing. He looked around, scanning the hundreds of chained girls, then the walls, the ventilation shafts, the guards' positions, like a soldier studying a battlefield. One of the younger alien girls, barely 15, whispered to her friend, "Why is he here?" No one knew. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. Most had vanished or been hunted long ago. The overseer ordered the guards to chain the man near the deepest tunnel, where the toxic fumes made breathing painful. "Break him first," he said. "Then send what's left to the smelter." The girls heard the overseer's laugh echo through the mine as the guards left. Hours passed. The new prisoner didn't cry or complain. He lifted his pickaxe and began working like the rest, silent and steady. When others dropped from exhaustion, he helped them up. When one girl spilled her water, he gave her his. The guards noticed but said nothing. They wanted to see how long before kindness died in him. By night, the slaves lay on the cold rock floor. The only sound was coughing and distant dripping. The human sat alone, leaning against the wall, staring at a small metal tag around his neck. It had 2 names scratched into it. One was his. The other was small, childlike handwriting. He closed his eyes, remembering a voice, soft, tired, calling him Dad. He could almost see his little girl smile before she coughed again, pale and weak from sickness. That memory burned brighter than the mine's blue light. That was why he was here. He wasn't a thief or rebel. He had come to find a cure. When he refused to sell his blood to the alien traders, they took him instead. They promised him freedom if he worked. They lied. Now he was a slave too. But as he looked around the mine and at the hopeless faces, the trembling hands, he felt something heavy in his chest. These girls were someone's daughters too, someone's sisters, and they were trapped here, forgotten by everyone. The next morning, when the guards shouted for work, he was already standing. One of them laughed and cracked a whip near his feet. "Work faster, human," the guard hissed, "or you'll feed the smelter today." The man didn't move faster. He looked at the guard and said quietly, "You'll have to kill me for that." Something in his voice made the guard hesitate. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like a storm that hadn't yet broken. The other slaves stared, stunned. No one ever talked back, not here, not to them. That night, while others slept, one small alien girl crawled closer to him. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Why did you talk like that?" she whispered. "They'll hurt you." He looked at her and gave a small smile. "Because they already hurt everyone else," he said. "It has to stop somewhere." The girl didn't understand fully, but the warmth in his tone made her chest ache. No one had ever spoken kindly here. She nodded and whispered, "My name is Lyra." He nodded back. "I'm Daniel." Lyra tilted her head. "You're not afraid?" Daniel looked toward the tunnel's end, where the blue ore shimmered like ghost fire. "I've been afraid before," he said softly, "but not of them." When the guards passed by later, they found Daniel still awake, staring into the glowing darkness. The overseer watched from above, frowning. Something about the human bothered him. He had seen hundreds of slaves, but never one who looked free even in chains. The overseer turned away, muttering, "Let him work. The mines break everyone." But down below, Daniel whispered to himself, "Not me." And as he tightened his chain around the rock, the wind howled through the tunnels like a distant roar, a warning that the darkness had finally met something it couldn't control. Days passed in the mines, each one long and cruel. The guards watched closely, waiting for the human to break. But Daniel did not. His back bled, his hands cracked, yet he still worked, still helped others. He never spoke much, but every movement had purpose. Calm, silent strength that made even the guards uneasy. The alien girls started whispering about him when the lights went dim. "He doesn't cry," one said. "He doesn't sleep," said another. Some believed he was an old war soldier. Others thought he was insane. But Lyra, the small alien girl who first spoke to him, saw something different in his eyes. Sadness. Deep, endless sadness. One night after the siren ended and the guards left, Lyra crawled to where Daniel sat against the wall. "Why do you help us?" she asked again, voice trembling. "You give food, you take lashina for us. You don't even know us." Daniel looked at her, quiet for a long moment. The blue ore light flickered on his face. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a dirty photo printed on old earth paper. Lyra leaned closer and gasped softly. It showed a little human girl with dark hair, smiling with 2 missing teeth. "She's my daughter," he said softly. "Her name is May." Lyra blinked, confused. "Where is she?" Daniel's eyes grew distant. "Far away, on a planet that's dying." He paused, voice shaking just a little. "There's a sickness there, a disease no one can cure. I came here to find the medicine." "The medicine?" Lyra asked, frowning. He nodded. "There's a mineral here, the blue ore. Humans call it cerathium. It can heal blood sickness. I heard it was buried in this mine." Lyra looked around the dark tunnel, the ore glowing faintly in the stone walls. "You came here for that?" "Yes," Daniel said. "I made a deal with the traders. I'd work, help extract the ore, and they'd give me enough to save her." He clenched his fists. "But they lied. They sold me instead." Lyra's small hand shook. "So you're trapped too?" Daniel gave a short nod. "Like you all. But I'm not staying here forever." For the first time, Lyra smiled, a tiny, fragile smile in the dark. "You talk like a hero," she whispered. Daniel's lips curved faintly. "No, Lyra, I'm just a father." The next day, rumors spread. One of the alien slaves had fainted near the heat vent, too weak to work. The guards laughed and dragged her toward the smelter, the place where useless slaves disappeared. But before they could throw her in, Daniel stepped forward. "Stop," he said. The guards turned. "What did you say, human?" Daniel walked closer, eyes hard. "Let her go." The biggest guard smirked. "Or what?" Daniel didn't answer with words. He grabbed the guard's arm mid-swing and twisted. The sound of bone snapping echoed through the tunnels. The guard screamed, falling to the ground. Everyone froze. No one had ever dared touch a guard. Before the others could react, Daniel snatched the fainted girl and carried her to the side tunnel. The siren screamed. He didn't care. The alien overseer came rushing down, plasma whip in hand. "You dare touch my men?" The overseer shouted. "You dare challenge me?" Daniel didn't flinch. She needed help. "You were going to kill her." The overseer cracked the whip. The burning light sliced across Daniel's chest, leaving a smoking line. He didn't move. The second strike came, harder, louder. Still, Daniel stood. The overseer's voice trembled with anger. "Why do you not scream, human?" Daniel looked straight into his eyes. "Because I've already lost everything that could make me scream." The overseer hesitated for the briefest moment, then turned away, shouting, "Lock him in the lower tunnel. No food, no water." 2 guards dragged Daniel down into the cold, dark pit below the main shaft. They left him there in silence, chained to the rocks. Hours passed. Maybe days. It was hard to tell. But when the guards finally came to check, they found something they didn't expect. Daniel was still alive. Still sitting upright. Lyra sneaked down one night, trembling as she brought a cup of stolen water. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They'll kill you." Daniel took the water, smiling faintly. "I told you before, Lyra, I'm not dying here." She frowned. "You can't fight all of them." He looked up at the dark ceiling, hearing the muffled voices above, the endless clinking of chains. "Maybe I can't," he said quietly. "But I can make them remember what fear feels like." That night, for the first time in years, whispers spread through the mine not about death, but about hope. The human who never screamed, the man who stood up for others, the father who would not break. And far above, the overseer stood in his quarters, staring at the glowing ore veins on the wall. The whispers had reached even him. He tightened his claws around his whip and muttered, If that human thinks he can defy me, he's wrong. But deep down, something in the overseer's heart, something small and long forgotten, trembled. The darkness of the mines had found its first light. The sound of chains and heavy boots echoed through the mine tunnels. The overseer's anger had turned the whole place into a storm of fear. The guards shouted louder. The whips fell harder. But still, the human didn't bend. Daniel kept working, every strike of his pickaxe echoing like defiance. His face was pale, his lips cracked, but his eyes, those calm human eyes, still burned with the same fire. The other slaves watched him quietly, pretending not to. Even the youngest one started standing a little straighter. One evening, a guard caught Lyra whispering near Daniel's station. The alien grabbed her by the arm and snarled, "No talking." He raised his whip, only to feel a hand grab his wrist mid-air. "Daniels, let her go," he said. His tone was low, quiet, but it carried a strange power. The guard stared, shocked that anyone dared to touch him. Then his face twisted in fury. "You think you're brave, human?" He spat, pushing Lyra aside. "Let's see how brave you are when you scream." He pulled Daniel toward the punishment ground, an open area near the main chamber where all could see. The overseer arrived, flanked by armored guards. Every slave was ordered to stop work and watch. The air felt heavy, the blue glow from the ore flickering like nervous candlelight. The overseer's voice cut through the silence. "You think you are their protector? You think you can defy my law?" He raised the plasma whip. "Then you will learn what happens to heroes." The first strike landed with a hiss burning through Daniel's back. The smell of scorched flesh filled the air. Some of the slaves looked away. Others began to cry softly. The second strike came harder. Then the third. Daniel's knees shook, but he didn't fall. Blood trickled down his spine, his breath came rough, but no sound escaped his lips. The overseer shouted, "Scream! Show them you are weak." Daniel looked up slowly, his face pale but his eyes cold and bright like steel. "You can't break something that's already broken," he said softly. The overseer's hand froze in midair. For a moment even he didn't breathe. The slaves looked at Daniel with wide eyes. That single sentence spread through the mine like fire in dry wood. The overseer's rage snapped back. "Enough, tie him to the post until sunrise. Let the cold finish what I started." 2 guards chained Daniel to a metal pole near the tunnel entrance. The temperature dropped, frost forming on the walls. The night was long, bitter, and cruel. But the next morning, when the siren sounded, the guards found him still standing, alive. Barely breathing, but alive. His head was bowed and frost covered his hair, yet there was a faint smile on his face. Lyra ran to him when the guards turned away. "You survived," she whispered, her small hands trembling. Daniel opened one eye and said quietly, "I told you, kid. They'll have to do better than that." Lyra felt tears sting her eyes. "Why do you keep doing this?" "You could have stayed quiet. You could have just obeyed." Daniel's gaze softened. "Because someone has to remind them we're still alive, that we still have a choice." That day, a strange energy filled the tunnels. The slaves started to whisper more boldly. They shared food. They helped one another when the guards weren't watching. The fear that once ruled the mine was cracking piece by piece, the overseer noticed. He could feel the shift in the air. He gathered his guards. "The human must die," he growled. "But not yet. I want them to see him fall. I want hope to die with him." That night, Daniel's chains were removed so he could work again. The guards believed his spirit was shattered. But when Daniel returned to the tunnels, the other slaves stepped aside for him. Lyra handed him a piece of metal wire she'd stolen. "For what's coming," she whispered. He nodded, slipping it into his pocket. Later, while everyone pretended to sleep, Daniel crouched near the vent shaft and studied the wall. He'd been watching for days, memorizing the guard routes, counting the hours between patrols. Now he whispered to himself, "Almost time." He looked up at the ore veins glowing faintly overhead, their light dancing across his scarred hands. His voice was a whisper meant for no one. "You'll see, May. Daddy's coming home." Far down the tunnel, the overseer stood watching from a distance, his eyes narrowing as if he could feel something shifting. The human's will was not bending, it was spreading. Like light creeping into cracks of the old stone, the overseer turned to his lieutenant. "Increase surveillance," he said coldly. "If the slaves think they can rebel, they'll meet the dark before dawn." But he didn't know. The dark had already met its match. When Daniel rose the next morning, something was different. The other slaves looked at him not as another broken soul, but as their leader. And as he lifted his pickaxe once more, there was a spark in the air, a silent promise that change was coming. For the first time in years, the mine did not echo only with chains. It echoed with quiet hearts beating faster, hearts that dared to hope. And in that place of shadows and cruelty, hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. The mine had changed. The air no longer carried only the sound of chains and screams, it carried whispers. Whispers of something forbidden, something dangerous, hope. It started small like a flicker in the darkness. One girl began humming an old song from her homeworld. Another dared to look a guard in the eyes. Then the whisper spread. The human lived. The human stood. The human fought. Every corner of the mine carried his name now, Daniel. The overseer noticed the shift. He increased the guards, doubled the punishment, and installed surveillance drones in the tunnels. But fear was no longer enough. The slaves had seen something stronger. Daniel walked slower now, his wounds not yet healed, but the other prisoners quietly helped him. When he lifted a heavy ore stone, 3 others came to lift it with him. When he was thirsty, someone always passed him water. It wasn't about kindness anymore, it was loyalty. One night, after the shift siren echoed through the tunnels and the guards retreated to their posts, Daniel sat with Lyra and 2 older alien girls near the heat vent. The air shimmered with faint blue light. "They're planning something," one girl whispered. "We heard the overseer. He wants to send 30 of us to the upper smelter next week. None of us come back from there." Daniel looked up slowly. "The smelter," he repeated. "That's near the power conduit, right?" The girl nodded. "Why?" Daniel rubbed his wrists, feeling the faint pulse of his old chain marks. "Because the power conduit controls the ventilation and security doors." He looked at the 3 of them. "If we can overload it, we can open the upper shafts." Lyra gasped softly. "You mean escape?" Daniel met her eyes. "No," he said quietly. "Not escape, freedom." The girls exchanged nervous glances. Freedom sounded like a dream, the kind that got you killed. But Daniel's voice carried calm certainty, like a man who had already made peace with danger. "We'll need timing, distraction, and a signal," he said. "And when it starts, don't look back." That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about his words. Freedom. It sounded impossible, yet her heart beat faster every time she imagined it. By the next day, something invisible had taken root. The girls began passing small messages in broken metal scraps. One group slowed their mining on purpose to make the guards focus there. Another memorized the guards' movement patterns. Someone even managed to steal a small piece of wiring from a drone, something Daniel could use. Slowly, the rebellion began to take shape. Then came the turning point. It was during the morning shift when one of the young alien girls collapsed again from exhaustion. The guards laughed. "Another weak one sneered, grabbing her by the hair. Daniel saw red. He dropped his pickaxe and marched forward before his mind could stop him. "Let her go," he said firmly. The guard shoved the girl aside and smirked. "You never learn, do you?" He swung his weapon, but Daniel caught his arm midair. With a swift motion, he slammed the guard against the wall. The alien groaned and fell, dazed. The entire mine froze. Dozens of slaves stared, breathless. Even the drones paused in their scanning. Then someone, no one remembered who, started to clap. A single quiet clap that echoed like thunder in the silence. The guard shouted, "Silence!" But it was too late. More claps joined. Then cheers. The tunnels erupted with cries of, "Daniel! Daniel!" The overseer stormed into the chamber, his face twisted with rage. He looked at Daniel standing tall, covered in sweat and dust, surrounded by slaves who no longer looked afraid. "Enough!" the overseer bellowed. "This is not a man. This is a disease, and I will cure it." He raised his plasma rifle, but before he could fire, Daniel shouted, "If you shoot me, every mine on this planet will know my name." For the first time, the overseer hesitated. That name, Daniel, was already spreading faster than he expected. Even the guards exchanged uneasy glances. "Take him to isolation," the overseer snapped. "Now!" Daniel didn't resist. As they dragged him away, he turned his head just enough to look at Lyra. "Be ready," he mouthed. Lyra's eyes widened. She understood. Tonight it would begin. That night, while the guards locked Daniel in a sealed chamber, the slaves moved like shadows. They rewired the old generator, broke a few light cables, and smuggled food toward the lower tunnels. Lyra knelt near the vent, whispering to herself, "For Daniel." When the night siren faded, a single rumble shook the tunnels. Sparks burst from the control panels. The power conduit overloaded, sending a wave of blue light through the mine. The gates jammed open. The alarms blared. Chaos erupted. Slaves screamed, but not in fear. They were running. The guards fired, shouting orders, but there were too many, for every fallen girl. Two more rose with pickaxes and chains as weapons, and in the isolation chamber, Daniel opened his eyes as the power cut out. He smiled faintly. "Good," he whispered. They started it. He pulled the hidden wire Lyra had given him and shorted his restraints. The lock hissed open. Outside, the mine burned with blue light and rebellion. The first spark had become a fire. The mine was no longer silent. It was alive, roaring, trembling, breathing. Blue sparks ran along the walls as the power conduits exploded one after another. Sirens wailed through the tunnels, echoing like the screams of angry ghosts. The rebellion had begun. Daniel burst from the isolation chamber, coughing through the smoke. The emergency lights flashed red, turning the air into chaos. Around him, alien girls ran barefoot through the stone halls, their chains broken, their eyes wide with fear and fury. "Stay together," Daniel shouted, his voice cutting through the alarms. "Don't run blind, follow the tunnels north." The slaves obeyed. They trusted that voice now, the voice that had stood against the whip and refused to break. A plasma bolt flew past Daniel's shoulder, burning the wall beside him. He turned just in time to see a guard aiming again. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed a loose chain from the floor and swung it. The chain wrapped around the guard's arm, yanking him off balance. The man fell and Daniel pulled the weapon free. He didn't hesitate. He fired once. The guard dropped. The other slaves stared. The human had just killed a guard. It was something none of them had ever seen before. Something they never thought possible. "Pick up his weapon," Daniel ordered one of the older alien women. "You'll need it." She trembled but nodded. I've never fired one before." Daniel handed her the plasma rifle and said, "Then start learning now." They moved fast. Each tunnel they passed filled with more freed slaves, hundreds now. Daniel led from the front, bloodied but determined. His mind was sharp, trained from his years as a miner and engineer back on Earth. Every sound, every vibration in the stone told him where the power cores were, where the weak walls could collapse. He had planned this for days, every route, every blind spot in the guard patrols. And now the plan was alive, breathing with every heartbeat around him. But the overseer wasn't gone. From the upper control tower, the overseer watched the chaos unfold on the monitors. His face twisted in fury. "Seal the tunnels," he roared. "Release the drones. Burn everything if you must." The drones launched from the walls, spinning metal predators with red scanning eyes. They fired lasers down into the crowds. Slaves screamed and ducked. Some fell. Daniel raised the stolen plasma rifle and fired into the dark. The blast hit one drone, sending it crashing into a wall. The explosion lit up his face in the red glow, human, fierce, and unyielding. Lyra ran up beside him, clutching a broken pickaxe. "Daniel, there are too many. They're cutting us off." He looked at her, breathing hard. "Then we go through the smelter," he said. "The smelter?" Lyra gasped. "That's suicide." Daniel smiled faintly, the kind of tired smile that hides 1,000 scars. "Maybe, but it's our only way out." He turned to the others. "Follow me." They ran toward the main shaft, the smelter pit. The air grew hotter and thicker. The roar of molten ore filled their ears. The floor trembled beneath their feet. When they reached the edge, the sight was terrifying. Rivers of glowing metal flowed through giant pipes, casting firelight across the stone walls. The slaves hesitated. It looked impossible. Daniel looked back at them. "This is the heart of the mine," he said. "If we break it, everything collapses. The guards won't chase us through fire." He jumped down onto a maintenance platform. Sparks flew. He reached into a broken power box, his hands moving fast, cutting and reconnecting wires. "Once this goes off," he shouted, "you run through the western vent tunnel. Don't stop until you see stars." "Daniel," Lyra cried. "What about you?" He looked up at her, sweat, blood, and dirt mixing on his face. "Someone has to light the fire," he said simply. The platform shook violently. The power core was overloading. Red lights flashed. The overseer's voice blared from the speakers, furious and desperate. "You'll destroy everything, human." Daniel yelled back, "Good!" The explosion hit like thunder. A blinding wave of blue and white fire tore through the tunnels, collapsing walls and melting metal. The sound of screaming and crumbling rock filled the air. Lyra and the others ran, covering their heads, the tunnel shaking around them. Behind them, fire chased like a living beast. When the flames finally died, the mine was silent again, but not dead. Smoke rose from the broken shafts. The overseer's tower had fallen. The guards were gone, and amid the rubble, a single figure stirred. Daniel. Burned, half-buried under debris, but alive. He coughed, his voice weak but steady. He looked around. No guards, no chains, no overseer. Only open tunnels leading into the unknown. He smiled faintly, whispering through cracked lips, "It's done, May. They're free." Then he closed his eyes. Far down the tunnel, Lyra and the survivors emerged into the cold night for the first time in years. The stars spread across the alien sky, endless and bright. She turned back toward the smoking mountain, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered. "We'll finish what you started." Behind her, the wind carried the faint echo of his voice. Not loud, not clear but strong enough to reach her heart. And somewhere, deep within the burning mine, the storm in the dark finally found peace. Smoke still poured from the mountain like a wounded beast. The night sky above Carthon glowed red, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. The rebellion had torn the mines apart, yet one shadow still lived inside the ruins, the Overseer. He crawled out from under broken steel beams, his armor scorched and his breathing ragged. His claws were cracked and half of his mask had melted, revealing the pale skin beneath. Around him, bodies of guards and drones lay scattered. He stared at the destruction in disbelief. "All this," he hissed, "because of one human." The words echoed through the collapsing tunnels, bitter and furious. He pulled himself to his feet, limping toward the main shaft. "You think you've won, human?" he muttered. "You think this ends here?" But the tunnels weren't silent. The sound of movement came from deeper inside, slow, heavy steps crunching against the rubble. Out of the smoke, Daniel appeared. His shirt was half burned, his arms cut and bruised, but his eyes still glowed with that same human fire. He looked like death itself, but he was still standing. The Overseer froze. You should be dead." Daniel gave a weak, tired smile. "You first," the Overseer roared, his rage filling the chamber. He raised a plasma blade from his belt, its edge glowing blue. "You ruined everything." "I gave them order. You gave them chaos." Daniel tightened his fists. "You gave them chains. I gave them a choice." Then they charged. The Overseer swung first, his blade slicing through the air. Daniel barely dodged, rolling to the side and grabbing a broken metal rod from the ground. Sparks flew as steel met plasma. The light flashed across the walls, red and blue like fire and lightning locked in war. "You're nothing," the Overseer shouted, forcing Daniel back step by step. "A dying father with no future." Daniel grunted, blocking another strike. "You're wrong," he said through clenched teeth. "My future is her." He pushed forward with everything he had left, striking the Overseer across the chest. The alien stumbled, roaring in pain. The blade slipped from his hand. Daniel didn't stop. He slammed the rod into a control panel, sending a surge of power through the floor. The entire tunnel shook, the ceiling groaning under the pressure. Sparks rained down like stars. "You'll kill yourself," the Overseer yelled, eyes wide. Daniel's voice was calm. "Maybe. But I'll make sure no one ever suffers here again." He pulled a lever beside the power conduit. Warning lights flared across the mine. A deep hum began to build. The last core reactor was overloading. The Overseer lunged in panic, tackling Daniel to the ground. "You fool. You'll destroy us both." Daniel looked up, his face inches away from the aliens. "Good." With one final shove, he rolled the Overseer toward the power pit, the glowing molten heart of the mine. The alien screamed as he fell, disappearing into the blue fire below. The explosion followed seconds later. It was like the mountain itself cried out, a deep, thunderous roar that shook the stars. The ground split open, blue fire shooting into the sky like a pillar of light. Lyra and the others far outside turned to see it. The flames rose high enough to light their faces. "He did it," she whispered. "He ended it." The shockwave hit moments later, warm and bright. The mountain collapsed in on itself, burying centuries of pain and darkness beneath stone. When the wind settled, silence returned. Only the stars watched now. Days passed. Search parties from nearby colonies arrived. Drawn by the explosion, they found nothing but ruins, melted ore, twisted metal, and bones. No sign of the human, but in the ashes one thing remained. A small, half-burned photo tucked inside a cracked metal tag. It showed a smiling little girl with missing teeth. Someone had carved a single word beneath it. May Lyra picked it up with trembling hands. She pressed it to her heart, tears filling her eyes. "Rest now, Daniel," she whispered. "You gave us everything." She turned to the others, the freed girls, the survivors, the ones who had seen the impossible. "We'll rebuild," she said softly. "Not as slaves, as sisters, and we'll tell his story." From that day on, no one entered the mines again. The ground remained warm for years, glowing faintly under the starlight. Locals called it the Grave of Fire. But to the freed girls, it was something else. It was the father's tomb, and sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind passed through the ruins, it sounded almost like a human voice, gentle, proud, and full of love. "Keep going," it seemed to whisper. "Don't stop." Lyra looked up at the sky one last time. She thought of his tired smile, his soft voice, his strength when all seemed lost. Then she whispered back, "We won't, Daniel. We promise." The stars above flickered faintly as if nodding in return. The overseer had fallen. The slaves were free, and the legend of the human father, the man who defied the darkness, had just begun to spread across the stars. Years passed after the fire swallowed Carthon Mine. The mountain no longer glowed, but the ground still whispered with heat when the wind blew across it. The slaves who once trembled there had become something new, a people reborn. They built a small settlement beside the ruins. No overseers, no chains, no orders barked in the dark, just laughter, tools, and the smell of cooking fires. The alien girls who once cried in the tunnels now walked freely under the sky. Their scars faded slowly, but their memories never did. Every year on the night when the stars shone brightest, they gathered by the foot of the ruined mountain. They called it the Night of the Father. They built a monument from melted ore and broken chains. At its center stood a piece of scorched metal, Daniel's old tag. Below it, carved deep into stone, were the words, "He came to save one child, and ended up saving us all." Lyra was no longer the small, frightened girl who used to whisper in the tunnels. She was taller now, stronger, with silver hair streaked with blue. Her hands were calloused from work, but she always wore a thin ribbon tied around her wrist, a piece of Daniel's torn sleeve. Children often followed her, asking her to tell the story again. Was he really human? They'd ask, eyes wide. "Yes," she would say softly, her voice steady, "and he was the bravest person I've ever known." The children always leaned close when she spoke. She told them how Daniel defied the overseer, how he fought without fear, how he spoke with kindness even when bleeding, how he smiled before the fire took him. Did he have a family? One little boy asked once. Lyra smiled sadly. "Yes, a daughter. Her name was May." The children's eyes softened. "Do you think she ever found out what he did?" Lyra looked toward the sky, toward the sea of stars Daniel used to stare at during long nights in the mine. "I think she knows," she said quietly. "I think she feels him every time she looks up." Years turned into decades. The small settlement grew into a village, then a city. Alien merchants from other worlds began to visit, drawn by the story of the human who defied an empire. They heard about the father of the flames, and they carried his name across the stars. Some called him Daniel the Brave. Others called him the miner who freed the moons. But to those who truly knew, he was simply the father. In time, his story reached planets far beyond Carthon, and one quiet evening on a small blue world far away, Earth, a young woman sat on a porch watching the night sky. Her hair was dark, her eyes kind, and around her neck hung an old pendant with the same name carved into it. May. She had grown into a woman now, working as a nurse in a small colony town. She had heard many stories of the outer worlds, but one message had spread more than others, the legend of a human who freed the enslaved of Carthon. She had listened with tears in her eyes when she heard his name, Daniel. She didn't know how his story reached her, maybe through travelers, maybe through fate, but something deep in her heart knew the truth. Her father was gone, but not lost. That night, May stood beneath the stars, clutching her pendant. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "You saved them, just like you wanted to save me." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the faintest sound, almost like a voice. She closed her eyes and smiled through her tears. Back on Carthon, Lyra walked through the rebuilt city. Every building had been shaped with symbols of chains breaking, of hands reaching upward. And in the city's center stood a statue of Daniel, not as a warrior but as a father. One hand held a broken shackle. The other rested gently on the head of a small alien child. Lyra stood before it and whispered, "You'd hate the statue. You'd say it's too much," she smiled softly. "But we needed it. We needed to remember what courage looks like." As night fell, the sky lit up with thousands of lanterns, glowing orbs drifting upward. The people whispered prayers of gratitude. The young, who never saw Daniel, spoke his name as if they had. Somewhere among the stars, the legend had already become something eternal. Because Daniel didn't just free slaves, he reminded galaxies that a single human heart could change everything. And though his body was gone, his fire burned in all of them, in Lyra's steady eyes, in the laughter of the free children, in the stories told on every world where hope had been forgotten. Long after Carthon cooled, when no one remembered the overseer's name, the legend of the human father remained, a story that crossed species, stars, and time, the tale of one man, one father, who walked into darkness and lit a fire no empire could ever extinguish. And sometimes, when the night wind moved through the rebuilt city, the people swore they could hear a voice, and soft, warm, and human, whisper through the stars, "Take care of them, for me."